Díomh go léir. Any artist will tell you that putting the spotlight on your ideas, your inner thoughts, your own creativity can often require personal strength. The French painter Henri Matisse, often known for his use of colour, once commented that creativity takes courage, and how right he was. And during a pandemic, challenges in creating must be appreciated even more. This country has produced some of the world's most valued artists and performers. And during these dark days of COVID-19, our artists still strive to do that which they love so much, to create. But the Arts and Culture Recovery Taskforce report that we launch here today sheds light on a dire crisis that the sector now faces and which requires action. I established the Taskforce in September to look across culture, the arts, the audiovisual industry, live performance, and the events industry in the not-for-profit and commercial sectors. This is the first time groups across the sectors have come together. I met with the task force at the start of its work and was struck both by the members' dedication and the seriousness of the situation facing the sector. It is now accepted that the impact of the pandemic will last longer for the thousands that work in arts and culture than any other. I welcome the recommendations today from the task force, which was so ably chaired by Claire Dignan, and which included artists, representative bodies and officials, not just from my department, but from across government. I note that the task force met numerous times and considered nearly 40 submissions and representations from practitioners across all sectors. They have been subject to a challenging deadline, but have produced their report in a matter of weeks, and I am grateful to all of the members for their energy, commitment and insight. The report outlines how these sectors face enormous challenges, including how and when to reopen venues and restart performances. Crucially, the report asks how our artists can survive until sectors open up again, especially amid fears that many, with no choice, could abandon their professions. Ireland's freelance community, including musicians and artists, have seen their incomes disappear. Performers have had no audiences which help inspire creativity. Cultural spaces, concert halls and galleries remain empty, and the lights have been turned off for the live events sector. During my first few months as a minister, I have heard firsthand from groups in these sectors about how the pandemic has damaged their livelihoods and about the need for tailored supports. I met representative bodies including the National Campaign for the Arts, Event Industry Ireland, Screen Producers Ireland, a number of national cultural institutions and the Arts Council, amongst others. I have endeavoured to be their voice at the Cabinet table, raising the plight of the arts, culture and events sector with my government colleagues. This has led to progress and commitments, including structural supports, emergency financial injections for areas under my remit as a minister, as well as innovative schemes which have been inundated with demand. Some 25 million was provided in June, including €20 million for the Arts Council, as well as additional supports for regional museums. A further €29 million was announced in the July stimulus, including additional funding for the Arts Council, Screen Ireland, national cultural institutions, a music stimulus, and for supports for live performance. Significant additional funding was announced in Budget 2021, with €130 million allocated to the Arts Council for 2021 and €50 million for supports for live performance. Aside from direct supports from my department, tens of millions of euro in support has been provided to those impacted in the arts, culture, performance and events sectors through the Pandemic Unemployment Scheme and through various wage subsidy schemes. Some within the sector have also availed of commercial rates waivers and may avail of the CRIS, which supports venues forced to shut their doors or where events are curtailed. I established the task force to develop a clear approach, informed by the views of all stakeholders, to protect and sustain the arts and culture sector through the COVID-19 recovery and beyond. This will be fed into our national recovery. Many measures recommended in the report are not just for survival, but for a robust recovery and one that can be sustained. Others will help artists, entertainers and technical professionals during and after the pandemic with training and wellbeing supports. The report makes recommendations for mechanisms to try and help the arts and culture sector survive through the pandemic, such as reimagining public and private spaces. A key recommendation is to pilot a universal basic income scheme for 3 years in the arts, culture, audiovisual and live performance and event sectors. There is a commitment in the programme for government to assess a pilot universal basic income, and one that is informed by a review of previous international models. Under the coalition commitments, this would result in a universal basic income pilot in the lifetime of this government. The call for a basic income level scheme for the arts, culture and live events sector was also supported by all members on the task force. Other financial interventions and supports recommended by the task force will be followed up by my department with counterparts in government. The government is also finalising its national recovery plan in the weeks ahead, and I have asked my cabinet colleagues to consider the task force report as part of those preparations. The task force has also suggested the establishment of a cross-sectoral oversight group to oversee and monitor this report. This is something my officials have already begun progressing. Some of the task force recommendations also fall under the responsibility of other departments or bodies. I intend to see that they follow up on those. While we admire and praise the courage of artists to continue creation during this pandemic, sentiment alone is not enough. The founding father of the European Union, Jean Monnet, is famously said to have declared, "If I were starting again, I would start with culture." Ní nárt go cur le chéile. Artists, musicians, crews and creators need our solidarity now, and I intend to see that the arts, culture and live events sectors and the recommendations from the task force are represented at the start and woven in to our national recovery.
Thank you, Minister. Arts, culture and entertainment, these are all things that make life worth living. The arts, culture, audiovisual and live events sector is deeply embedded in local communities and economies across this country. The sector is a place where culture meets commerce. It feeds into the creative industries, it supports innovation and it attracts talent and investment to this country. It's one of the pillars of the tourism and hospitality industries and generates significant benefits for the Irish economy, with the wider arts sector alone directly supporting almost 55,000 jobs. Our arts, culture and entertainment help to define us. They affect how the rest of the world sees us, and they encourage people in other countries to engage with us. They help us to evolve our sense of what it means to be Irish. But in March this year, this sector was shut down completely. And since then, most of it has remained closed, with some sporadic flurries of activity. The audiovisual sector has reopened, albeit under very strict and very costly COVID-19 health and safety guidelines. But theatre, the music sector, cinemas, museums and art galleries, festivals, pantomime now, street theatre and circus, arts festivals, dance and opera, our national cultural institutions, all have been closed almost all the time since last March. The sector is unravelling. With each month of closure, the risk grows that Ireland will emerge from COVID-19 to find its arts, culture and events sector decimated, with some venues closed for good, businesses folded and large numbers of skilled and talented performers and workers gone to find work in other sectors. And it could take years to rebuild the sector. So this was the landscape facing the task force as we began our work. We identified 3 problems: how to ensure that the sector survives and recovers from this crisis, how to build resilience into the sector, and how to best position the sector to move forward from where it is now. COVID-19 calls for bold and innovative thinking, and we have made just 10 recommendations, which we believe are transformative, which are largely cross-sectoral, and which were agreed unanimously by all the members of the task force. Recommendation 1 is one that we very quickly and unanimously agreed on: the establishment of a 3-year pilot universal basic income scheme for workers in the sector. We believe this is the best way to protect livelihoods and to prevent a flight of skills and talent. A UBI opt-in pilot will create a more stable social protection mechanism, and that will allow artists and workers to sustain themselves during the pandemic and to take up work when it comes along without losing existing social protection supports. The uncertainty of COVID-19 means that very few workers in the sector are likely to have steady work and a regular income for the foreseeable future. With UBI, everyone engaged in artistic and creative work would have a small, regular and unconditional cash flow and can make financial plans. All other income would be earned separately and subject to taxation at the marginal rate. A UBI pilot would help the sector to gradually recover and stay largely intact. As a further means of ensuring recovery, we also recommended some other financial supports. These include amendments to the tax code in the form of a VAT compensation scheme, and we strongly recommended in Recommendation 3 the transposition into Irish law of the EU Directive on Copyright in the digital single market. This one move would significantly increase the capacity of rights holders, such as writers and musicians, to generate revenue from the recording, streaming or broadcasting of their work. And we also urge that the Audiovisual Media Services Directive be transposed into Irish law, as this would provide real benefits to Irish audiovisual workers and companies. Recommendation 4 sets out to address the problems of the very many live event SMEs which have been completely shut down by COVID-19. These are the small businesses that supply or present the concerts, festivals, sporting and cultural events and much more. These are ultimately viable businesses, but they're currently excluded from Budget 2021 supports because their work is largely business to business and they do not have public-facing premises. Yet even though they are currently unable to trade, they still face urgent financial demands such as bank loans and lease payments, insurance, rent and cash flow to make their payments as part of the EWSS scheme. In Recommendation 5, we propose supports for the arts budgets of our local authorities in 2021 so that they will be enabled to maintain their investment in arts, culture and events at 2020 level, despite income losses caused by COVID-19. The task force had many representatives of the arts and events sector amongst its members, and so we heard firsthand about the stress, isolation, loss of purpose and mental turmoil felt by many in the creative industries at this time. And in Recommendation 6, we propose the creation of a programme of physical and mental well-being for the sectors. It's very important that people stay well if they're to remain in the sector and continue their creative practice. The task force considers the retention of skills and talent to be one of the biggest challenges facing the sector, and we believe that providing platforms for upskilling and professional development could be a game changer here. So Recommendation 7 proposes that enhanced development and training supports are provided to artists and creative workers at this time when they cannot work. This will allow them to upskill and will future-proof their skills, and that will ensure that the sector will be more resilient, which is one of the key strategies of the National Economic Plan. Everyone we spoke to in the sector wants to get back to work, and we recognise, though, that public health and safety must underpin all policy decisions at this time. But at the same time, we strongly believe we must get even some small arts, culture and entertainment events and venues back up and running or opening safely. Recommendation 8 proposes that the current categorisation of arts and culture events and venues within Resilience and Recovery 2020 to 21 Plan for Living with COVID-19 requires further examination, as the current treatment of cultural activities and venues does not necessarily reflect the circumstances of many venues or the particular behaviour of artists, audiences and venues in the sector. As we look forward towards the sector beginning to open up, we believe that outdoor spaces in both the built and the natural environment offer the best hope of attracting back audiences, and research supports this. The Taskforce believes that all across Ireland there are spaces which can, with imagination and a well-funded capital improvement programme, be adopted to allow live performances in a safe environment, adhering to public health guidelines and enriching life in our towns and villages and cities, again one of the goals of the National Economic Plan. So this recommendation proposes the creation of Reimagining Our Public Spaces, a capital improvement programme for outdoor spaces. And our last recommendation, recommendation 10, addresses the issue of transitioning to a sustainable low-carbon economy, which is at the heart of the National Economic Plan. We have recommended the creation of a Creative Green programme to provide practical advice and resources to reduce carbon footprint and overall environmental impacts in the creative and events sectors. The inactivity forced upon the sector by COVID-19 presents an opportunity to address climate and environmental issues now in order to contribute distinctively towards the building of a better and more sustainable shared future. And the sector is very keen, Minister, you'll be glad to know, to get involved in this. This was something we had a lot of submissions on. Almost 17,000 people work in the Irish audiovisual sector. When all production activity was halted due to the pandemic, numerous support measures were put in place by government to help ensure the sustainability of the sector, and the industry is slowly emerging and adapting to living with COVID-19. And the Taskforce recommends that those and other measures continue into 2021 to mitigate against the challenges of audiovisual production during unprecedented levels of uncertainty. The Taskforce recommendations were unanimously agreed. We believe that they will ensure the best survival of the sector and will help to develop the resilience it needs to withstand the uncertainties of the next few years and beyond. I'd like to thank all the members of the Taskforce for their dedication and unstinting work in delivering this report in such a tight time frame. We were exceptionally well supported by our colleagues in the Department of Tourism, Culture, Arts, Gaeltacht, Sports and Media, and by the Secretariat to the Taskforce, and I thank them most sincerely. And finally, the Taskforce members asked me to thank Minister Martin for giving us the opportunity through the membership of this Taskforce to contribute to the securing of the future of a sector we all care deeply about. I wish the Minister good wind behind her work in delivering the recommendations in the report, and I urge her colleagues across government to support her in her efforts. I choose to be an optimist, and so I want to end with my wishes for the sector, as beautifully expressed by the late poet Derek Mahon. What can I wish for you but happier days to make up for the crisis you came through with such resilience? Thank you.
Participants, and there's just over 7,000 in the category of arts, entertainment and recreation, but that includes sports. So how many people do you imagine would be on the UBI?
I might answer that.
Yeah.
It's very hard to say because the proposal is for a pilot programme and it's an opt-in. So you could work in the sector but you might not choose to opt into it. So it very much depends on the numbers who would opt in, and I think that's one of the tasks that the people involved in the oversight body will be looking at. But the difference in cost between sustaining people on current social protection and opting them into UBI is not enormous on a case-by-case basis. And the issue then arises as to the benefits of UBI, which actually encourages, it has shown in other countries, it encourages people to get back to work, it encourages entrepreneurship, because you maintain UBI, but you can take on other work, and then gradually you get more and more involved in getting back into the workforce, and then at a particular point it becomes more sensible for you to come off UBI and you're back in employment or work and supporting yourself again.
Very much. There's already been a great welcome for the idea of this universal support payment from groups today. So can I ask, what happens now? This is a recommendation. So what do you expect to happen now? Is there a time frame in mind? And also, is the budget there for it? Are you happy that we can afford it? It can be afforded.
I guess what happens as of today, I presented the recommendations to Cabinet, and I've indicated my intention to set up very quickly, as a matter of urgency, an oversight group to look at these recommendations. to assess them, and there'll be different departments have responsibilities in different areas as you look at the 10 different recommendations. But it's my hope, I believe my Cabinet colleagues have been very supportive of the arts and culture sector in recent months. You can see that through the budget, and I'm hoping that they will engage positively from officials' point of view, but also with me. I will continue engaging on this. The UBI this task force was in the programme for government, and that it should feed into the National Economic Plan as well. So that's something that the recommendations will feed into that too.
Minister, can I just ask on recommendation 8, the further examination of the COVID-19 living with the virus plan, how confident are you that you can get that re-examined in terms of the arts sector? Because obviously there's been criticisms that some of the rules and regulations in the plan as it stands is very one size fits all, and perhaps an outdoor comedy event might say that they can hold X amount of people rather than the set amount. How confident are you that you can get that looked at and redrawn, or is there a plan in place perhaps that people might propose their plans to government and get approval for them on a case-by-case basis?
I'm very aware from my engagement with the National Cultural Institutions, with venues, that this is an issue, and there's ongoing engagement now with my officials, with officials in the Department of Health and with the Taoiseach's department, to see what can be done there, because we're aware it is an issue. So to see, can there be a tweaking of levels to look at the individuality of each venue or cultural institution to see can we have access. But that's ongoing negotiations at present.
We felt quite strongly at the task force that there needed to be just the stakeholders in the sector, if they could be brought more into the discussions around this, because there's actually great expertise in the arts and events sector around health and safety, and it's what a lot of those people do. It's their profession. And also the people operating the national cultural institutions, where these tend to be in large spaces, very well aerated. It's very easy to manage and control numbers. So the feeling was that if more of the people involved in these activities and sectors could be part of the consultation and could input into it, that it might be possible to persuade people who carry a very onerous responsibility for public health at the moment, and we recognise that, but we still feel there's space for consultation and engagement, and if people could get around the table and talk some of this through more, that there might well be the possibility for reconsidering the guidance that's there at the moment.
And I would believe that their voice is critical in all of this, and that's why I've had that continuous engagement. But I agree with the recommendation that their voice needs to be heard in this. It's similar to in sport. The expert group in return to sport is from those who are involved in sport. So we need that voice from those who are in the venues and in the theatres and our cultural institutions to feed into this as well.
Minister, I just see from the numbers here that this could be worth up to €2,500 extra over the PUP. So I'm just wondering, what do you say to other sectors that might feel it's not fair because they can't work during this time? And secondly, just to clarify, can sports people apply for this payment?
For the UBI, well, the recommendation in this is for the arts and culture. So that's the recommendation as outlined in this.
No,
report.
we weren't looking. Why would we be looking at sport? We weren't. That's the categorisation that the Department of Social Protection uses. Yeah. No. The recommendation is, I think it's very clear. It says who it covers. Yeah.
Why should this sector get preference over them?
This is the recommendation coming from this Arts and Culture Task Force. As you know, it doesn't come as a surprise to people to know that I'm an advocate for the UBI. I negotiated that into the programme for government, that there would be a pilot scheme. But I think we really have to look at our arts and our culture. As I said earlier on, sentiment's not enough. We talk so much about our artists and how we value them, but I guess this is the artist saying to us through the task force, well, do something about it, please. And I think we have to look at those who make artistic and creative work, where that is their chief occupation. They often experience income insecurity and cash flow problems and even poverty, and that was before the pandemic, just like the UBI was a proposal before the pandemic. And for the creation of art, whether it be music, live events or literature, it requires practitioners. It's crucial. They must have the freedom to create. So we don't necessarily need to stifle our arts and cultural collateral by having them work in alternative careers, instead of being free to do what they do best and work on their craft. But also the Ernst & Young Arts Council report in 2020 found the recession in the arts will be around 55% as opposed to the 11% in the Irish economy as a whole. And the same group found that 58% of arts workers were wholly reliant on PUP. We have to remember they're the first out, basically, and we don't know when they'll get back. So, but this again is for the oversight committee to engage and to look, and it's key, I suppose, the different departments with responsibilities in these areas, how the officials engage each other, and how I liaise with my cabinet colleagues. But as I said, I feel the cabinet colleagues have been very supportive of this sector to date.
If I might, could I just to add on to that as well. I mean, what we were looking at was how to help people survive until things begin to improve for people working in the sector. And as the Minister said, first to close and probably last to open. And it's a sector that's already characterised by an awful lot of uncertainty in people tend not to be employed. They're likely to be freelance, then they're on a contract, then they're not working, then they may be on a bursary, or they're waiting to hear from the Arts Council will they get funded, or somebody else, maybe the philanthropic funding. It's a very uncertain and precarious sector at the best of times, and it's now things are absolutely desperate for people. So for us looking at how to address that, given that there is this commitment to operating a pilot scheme during the lifetime of the current government, it seems like a very good fit. It's a contained sector. It has all the characteristics that other countries have chosen in the sectors where they've tried it, like that freelance and uncertainty and different types of employment. It also it makes it easy if the government wants to look at this pilot as a way of looking at the impact of UBI and do comparators. You can do that quite easily by comparing what would happen here with what has happened in other countries. So you have to pick somewhere to do it, and I suppose we're here looking at a crisis in the sector that we were looking at. There was a commitment to try it under this government, and we just feel this is the sector that's ready to be used for the pilot, and that it would be hugely important to the sector and also very interesting for policymakers and economists to see how it would operate.
There is a similar type support, not exactly the UBI model in France, and it's actually there since 1936, giving support specifically to those who work in the arts and entertainment sector. So it's something for us to really give serious consideration to.
Sorry if you mentioned this already, but I just wanted to check. Did you say how much it might equate to, the UBI, or how it would be determined how much it would be?
What the payment would be. There's
Yes.
an example. Sorry, I'm going to just go back to it because I'm trying to stay on top of all 10 of the recommendations. The suggestion, the amount of the figure that was proposed, I've lost it now. It is in the report. I'm sorry. Can I come back to you on it in a minute? I've literally just lost it. Pardon? Page 42. Thank you very much. I know it's there. It's blanked on me here. I know it's on page 4.
It does set out how it can be applied as
It proposes an amount of money. Sorry, a UBI at the national minimum wage, I beg your pardon, of €10.20 per hour was the figure that was proposed at the national minimum wage. Okay, sorry about that.
Secondly, just as you said, that a well-funded capital investment plan would be needed to, I suppose, reimagine public outdoor spaces. Would that be kind of a justifiable investment, given that we obviously live in kind of Irish weather, and the fact that the pandemic won't hopefully last forever, so the need for outdoor venues won't, I suppose, be necessary forever? So does it make sense to put so much capital investment into outdoor spaces?
Well, we talked a lot about this on the Taskforce, and we looked at what the National Economic Plan was saying as well about a real desire to improve the quality of life in towns and villages across the country, to spread economic benefit across the country, and to try and move away from having such a centralised economy, which we have at the moment with most employment in big cities. And the pandemic has kind of accelerated that move of people being able to work from where they want to and people moving back out of the bigger urban areas. So what we're looking at is in reimagining public spaces. It's not just for performances. I mean, if you have a better streetscape in a town or village, you can see how it can be used for performance, for arts and culture, but you can also see how it can be used for festivals. You could see how it could be used for people wanting to eat outside. If you look at the example in Cork at the moment, I think Cork City Council was one of the very first councils to really move on getting a good urban landscaping and urban furniture in parts of the city centre. And as people are living more outside, and I think that we're going to be continuing for quite some time to have to be more conscious of our health around crowded places. I think that there is a demand for that, and just to feel that that towns and villages and our suburbs as well have attractive outdoor spaces and that they can be used for so many things alongside arts and culture.
And as Claire said, it's not only the advantage for artists to have that space, but as someone who comes from a smaller community outside Dublin, there's a lot of work needs to be done in bringing life and breathing life back into our rural towns and villages. So there's a real opportunity here to do the two, to create these beautiful spaces that will enhance communities, breathe life back into them, but also be a place for performance.
We're not looking at constructing. We're not looking at constructing buildings. I mean, I live in Dún Laoghaire, so one of the thoughts that I have, for example, is there's the old ferry port in Dún Laoghaire where there's a big open space and there are kind of sails overhead, but it's extremely windy and very unwelcoming at the moment. And I keep looking at that and thinking, I wish the Dún Laoghaire Down County Council would do something, or the port company do something with that space, make it more attractive, because at the moment our suburbs are full of people walking around looking to congregate. I know we're not meant to be congregating in large numbers, but just looking for spaces to live their lives more outside. I think there are opportunities to adapt places to make it easier to do that.
Go off topic. The takeaway pints issue, we were told this morning that in Cabinet it was pushed back from some Green ministers that walked back the memo about banning takeaway pints. What's your own personal view on it, and how did it come about that it was dropped?
It was discussed today, of course. Cabinet, what happens at Cabinet is confidential, but many of the ministers, there was agreement that there should be further engagement with Gardaí on enforcement before you'd consider any new legislation. The Green Party, speaking for my own party, we've always been of the view that we want to bring people and communities with us as opposed to forcing change or cooperation through laws. Look, I think we have to look at level 5, and the numbers were moving in the right direction. They were going down for the first 3 weeks, and it seems like some sort of complacency has fed into it in week 4. So I'd be appealing to everyone. Let's pull together in these last 2 weeks. We all want to get to the end of this level 5 restriction and open up for Christmas. That's what we want, but we all have a part to play in this, in uniting behind that. I know also that the Taoiseach and the Minister for Health and the Minister for Justice will meet with the Garda Commissioner to talk about, how it's important we engage with the Gardaí to see about further engagement on that enforcement. As I said before, you'd bring in any new regulations or legislation, but it's really about. I think the message needs to be thank you. This is a really tough time for us as a nation, for us, for businesses, for performers, for artists who are sacrificing so much. And don't let it slip now, because we want our businesses to open. We want our theatres and our cultural institutions to open. We want people to perform again. We want to visit our families. We want to share Christmas. But it's about this last 2 weeks. Let's really come together and make the difference and be able to open up.
Hi. There will obviously be very positive reaction to the income suggestion, and it's excellent that the Cabinet reacted well. What is your best hope or your best instinct in terms of timescale for that to begin? Within the lifetime of the current government, I presume you think is a fairly long stretch.
Yeah.
When might it actually get to people's pockets?
Within the programme for government, we said it would be the Low Pay Commission to examine the universal basic income. But as I said, informed by a review of previous international pilots, so we looked to Finland, Germany, the Netherlands. I think this report really presents the opportunity to start that debate today. And as you say, in the lifetime of the government, I'd like to start engagement with the Oversight Committee on this as soon as possible. I think there's an urgency that to supporting our artists and those who create. And so we can't forget that urgency. And also the fact that the report and the task force within the programme for government is to feed into the national economic plan. So there's a space there when we launch that to acknowledge that role of the task force and its recommendations within the national economic plan. I personally will be working with my cabinet colleagues, really advocating about the urgency in this to address this one.
In relation to the takeaway points and the whole drinking outside issue, there were some reports there that about consultation in terms of with the Health Minister, Stephen Donnelly, about outdoor venues and the restriction of alcohol being purchased at some of those arts and cultural events. Do you think that is a rudder under the new recommendations going forward? Will that be something that might be brought in for cultural events, the restriction of alcohol, or do you think perhaps the whole pushback, I suppose, against maybe personal responsibility and takeaway points, and how perhaps that might have been a step too far for some people, do you think that might perhaps curtail any move towards that?
You're talking in relation to December rather than the actual recommendations about the cultural spaces, or a combination of the two?
This was the government intervening a bit too far in people's right to perhaps have a drink. Is that something that you would think there might be pushback for heading into live events? That's what I suppose a lot of people like, to go and see a play and have a glass of wine, and that's part and parcel of a lot of people's enjoyment.
Again, it comes down to the enforcement. Like what we saw at the weekend, it's my understanding that the Gardaí, when they turned up, the crowd dispersed. So I think it's all about enforcement and increased visibility. And again, if we want these to open up, be it outdoors, we have a part to play individually. It's all about how we value our arts, and if we want people to be in a position to perform again, then everyone has to play their part. And it's something that in the engagement of my officials with the Department of Health officials and Taoiseach, that I'm sure will be discussed in the coming weeks.
Just again on the takeaway points, the commentary that's in the public domain about the proposals around the takeaway points or the drinking on the streets, that they were kind of a knee-jerk reaction to social media outrage, did that feed into the decision to withdraw the proposal?
No, there was no knee-jerk reaction. We discussed it today at Cabinet. Was there a need to do that? And we felt no, because it's it makes sense just to engage further with the Gardaí. We knew that the Gardaí played their part at the weekend, and it's increasing that engagement with the Guards and on the enforcement issue.